Good afternoon. It's kind of a beautiful day. It's not quite as bright and sunny as it has been in the past, or what the forecast even said it was going to be. But I'm coming to you this afternoon to talk a little bit about traditionalism, and what a traditionalist really is to me. And then the final thing I want to talk about is a little bit of legacy. So it's easy to see by some of the stuff I've brought out ahead of time that I'm pretty a traditional guy, and I'm sure there's a little bit of question to that, and the answer is maybe, depending on how you look at things, because there's two traditions that I kind of believe in, and I have my special opinions on. Now this girl right here, we've already seen her before. It's a smoothbore 54 caliber. Now, my personal belief is that even in 1761, as this indicates, that we were not so stuck in our tradition that we didn't have an open mind enough to any changes that might come along that might make our weapon just a little bit better. I have nothing against shoot and tow or leaves or whatever as part of my load development. I enjoyed doing that part of it. But nothing in our experience says that if fiber wads or over powder shot or over shot card comes along, that we wouldn't accept that at all. Because if we was to think that way, then the wheel lock would have never became the flintlock. Fulminated mercury would have never been developed. Cushion cap wouldn't have led into a rimfire. And let's face it, from that point on, it just kept going higher. So this is what I'm going to talk about in some ways, the traditional side of that, as opposed to traditionalism, I guess, is for lack of a better way of putting it, that I, as a traditional hunter, feel an obligation to be the most effective harvester in the best humane way I possibly can. So if I take a weapon like this, I can go to a shoot and I can shoot all day with the best of them, shooting tow or whatever, and have a lot of fun. But when it comes to harvesting something, I'm not above load development, even if it means going so far as to use this 54 caliber barrel as a 28 gauge shotgun. And just to clarify that a little further, if I can find a flight control shotgun for a smoothbore cylinder bore that gives me the ability to take out from the neck up and not damage a whole lot of food or make a bird suffer, I'm going to do it. I hope that kind of explains it a little bit, because at this point I'm going to set this guy back down and I'm going to address what I call the elephant in the room. This is a replica of an 1866 Remington carbine. Doesn't matter that it's made by Bertha, it doesn't matter anything, but there's going to be something that just sticks out like a sore thumb. I have a couple of disabilities that's developed in the last couple of years. It was somewhere about April, maybe May, we don't really know, that I had a stroke that affected my vision. And I found that this little device helps me stay in the program and shooting. Now let's forget the fact that this has got to be the worst idea Remington ever had, ergonomically a nightmare. But I got this thing particularly to develop some other open-minded young person's idea by the name of Joni Kennedy, also known as Ruger Old Army Girl. She's no longer with us, but I felt the need to develop her idea further. This is the reiteration or iteration of my version of it, in which she was getting 50 grain charges inside of her Ruger Old Army. I decided to investigate that, knowing that a Remington's not much different in capacity, and by God, between my own bullet developments, I can get a 60 grain charge in here with a 165 grain conical. This is that ongoing project. I've already test fired it. The gun holds up to the load. Don't forget your earplugs when you're around it, but it will do it. I'm going to set this back down and go from there. I think you kind of get my drift here. I don't know as I can keep my thoughts together so long as not to get lost in thought, but I also promised you guys the 5th way Bertha put something under, and it is a true story of a fella by the name, and I won't explain how he got his nickname, but 2.5 be better. Him and I was together on a combination pronghorn and mule deer hunt. Now, he was carrying a 30-06, and I was carrying Bertha. We both harvested it in 2 different ways, our pronghorns, and we were out for an afternoon mule deer hunt. Conversation kind of went that, hey, by the way, someday I'd like to try to take something with with old Bertha. And I said to him, well, that's probably possible someday. We were working down a ridge when all of a sudden he just snatched my rifle out of my hand and handed me his and said, I gotta try something. And as soon as he pointed it, I knew what he was looking at was a pretty decent mule deer buck on the opposite side of a cut in the side of a hill, about level with us. And Bertha went off with a great big old giant plume of smoke, and as the plume of smoke went, I watched the mule deer that I saw go stotting down the hill like so. I looked at him and I said, you missed. No, I didn't miss. I swear I didn't miss. Sure enough, I looked over at the hill and there was 4 legs straight up in the air, just going like this. So we took the 1/4 mile walk down that cut and back up to the other side, and I looked at this deer still sitting there with all 4 legs up in the air, and I went, what the hell did you do? He says, well, I assumed he was 250 yards away, so I shot 1.5 feet over his back. Oh, well, what I witnessed was a small mule deer buck that it looked like a samurai sword that he took off his left antler, clean as a whistle. Looked around, and there was the antler a few yards away, and the skull of that deer was crushed. And it was the darndest thing I ever did see, and I realized that now there's a 5th element to my yarn, and I had to figure out how to get it in there. Now, I'm telling you this as somebody that you've already heard, presuming you've already heard the first 4, and like any good yarn, I could never tell it the exact same way every time I said it. So in this case, I'm going to tell it, and I'm going to try to stand back up here one more time. I'm going to try to tell it from the way that I said before. Excuse me. And if my eye is as true as she is too, the other 3 will no longer matter. And speaking of, there's a 5th way that snuck in, and that's the impact of her round is so thunderous and and hard hitting that when she hits you in the tip of the toe or the tip of the antler, it won't matter because the stuff in between your ears no longer matters. God, that came out bad, but that's what pretty much the gist of it. Now, I've already addressed one elephant in the room, and it's right here. Surgical surgery that went bad, and I no longer can sit in the saddle. So now my horse, instead of having 4 legs, is over here with 4. It is what it is, and I'm not unhappy about it. But I want to also talk a little bit about legacy, and I hope this makes any kind of sense to you. But I know I talk about Wyoming a lot, but this is actually the state of my birth. And there's 2 people that is very important to me. And one of them, of course, is my father. He had the patience to let me do what I did. He didn't care for black powder. He was a military guy. Deer hunting for him was originally old military rifles. But he didn't understand black powder at all. But he was the one that gave me my first Thompson Center Hawking kit at 12 years old. I built it. To this day, at the high school I went to just 20 miles that way, picture of that Hawking and me still sits in that hallway with my senior class picture. But I got to talk a little bit about a guy that only seen or even met for about a 24-hour period when we were taking a family trip back to show the land of where I was born. And we dropped over into Spokane, Washington, and I met a man by the name of Harry Grenay. Knew his wife pretty well. She would show up at our house once, maybe twice a year to visit. But it was he who really got me started at 10 years old when he took the time to take me to a range with a double-barreled 12-gauge cap-lock muzzleloader. Couldn't tell you what the brand name was on it, but he took the time not only to take me out there and shoot, and I fell in love immediately with charcoal and sulfur like that. But he took the time to show me how to properly clean it, and to this day I still clean every time the same way. And that's where I want to talk a little bit more about legacy, is if we're, as people who are traditionalists, are more worried about the thread count. This is a gift from an Anishinaabe woman, elder woman. I no longer care about that. And if we're confronting youngsters with that kind of an attitude that want to show any interest, we need to knock it off. Give them some space, give them some ability to ask questions, and let their mind do the work for them. It's kind of my idea, if you've heard me talk before, that I love a rifle or a shotgun or whatever that can do multiple things. That's kind of where even the idea of what would Ashley do function really is not only is it plausible and likely it could have been made, but if I introduce that to a new youth, I've given them every season for one gun and a way to let them get started in it. And quite frankly, at a rendezvous, you're going to be quite the attention getter if that gun is built. So with that in mind, I know some people will look at this thing and go, what the hey? All of us can look at this gun and go, what is that? Well, to be honest with you, I can tell you it's made in Spain. That's about all I can tell you about it. It's got odd little markings. We all know the trigger guard's kind of off. The sights are off. But I also can tell you that I have shot this little rifle, and the biggest problem I had with it is it would not lower low enough to get the impact where I wanted it. It kept shooting still high. So I just threw in a cheap, taller sight to counteract that and put it to the side, because this was a pawn shop find that had a $100 bill on it along a line of rusted out inline muzzleloaders. And I seen that $100 bill and I told the pawn shop owner I had 80, and he said, I'll take it. And I hope that someday I run into that little sparkly-eyed 10-year-old, male, female, doesn't matter, take them and her parents out to the range and get them started in this. And I think that's what our job, especially at our ages, should be our goal, is to watch our legacy keep going on. Because if we allow the propagandists who want to sell them inlines take over, the side lock thing's going to disappear. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time.